Carney's controversial bill sparks alarm over powers that could bypass oversight and aid Brookfield. Bill C-5, championed by Prime Minister Mark Carney, has stirred a political firestorm as critics raise red flags over its potential to grant sweeping authority to cabinet ministers while bypassing key democratic and legal safeguards. Although framed as a nation-building initiative aimed at boosting development, energy, and infrastructure projects, many view the bill as a mechanism that would allow the federal government to sidestep established laws and public accountability. What began as a proposal to reduce bureaucratic delays has evolved into a national debate about the very structure of Canadian governance and whether the public can trust the government to act in the country's best interest. The bill grants the federal cabinet the power to label any infrastructure, energy, or housing project a matter of national interest. Once that designation is made, the government can override several cornerstone federal laws that were designed to protect the environment, Indigenous rights, and public accountability. These include legislation such as the Impact Assessment Act, the Fisheries Act, and sections of the Criminal Code. Decisions typically subjected to public consultation and parliamentary review could instead be made swiftly and unilaterally by ministers. This shift has sparked concern that due process is being cast aside in favor of executive convenience. A significant part of the backlash stems from concerns that these extraordinary powers could be used to benefit private corporations with close connections to the current administration. Mark Carney's prior association with Brookfield Asset Management, a major global investment firm, has become a focal point. Although Carney is no longer officially affiliated with Brookfield, critics argue the bill's structure leaves open the possibility that firms like Brookfield could enjoy special treatment. Projects tied to renewable energy, modular housing, or carbon capture, all sectors where Brookfield is active, could be fast-tracked without the same oversight required of others. The process by which the bill is being pushed through Parliament has only intensified scrutiny. Opposition MPs and advocacy groups have criticized the limited time allotted for debate, the lack of expert testimony, and the apparent unwillingness to entertain amendments. Even some Liberal MPs have voiced discomfort with the accelerated process, urging the government to take the time to review the legislation thoroughly and transparently. The speed at which Bill C-5 is moving has raised suspicions that the government is trying to minimize public input before enacting major changes with long-term consequences. Environmental organizations have sounded alarms about the damage that could result from sidelining established regulatory frameworks. The Impact Assessment Act exists to ensure that projects are evaluated for their potential harm to wildlife, air and water quality, and broader ecosystems. Under Bill C-5, those evaluations could be suspended or skipped entirely if a project is deemed nationally significant. Critics warn that this opens the door for projects that are financially lucrative but environmentally destructive to proceed unchecked, jeopardizing Canada's ecological future in the name of economic expedience. Indigenous leaders have also expressed concern, warning that the bill undermines their right to consultation and consent on development affecting traditional and treaty lands. While the government insists that Bill C-5 doesn't eliminate the duty to consult, many argue that the language of the bill is too vague and that it fails to guarantee meaningful engagement. Given Canada's recent history with reconciliation and ongoing issues such as the lack of clean drinking water in many Indigenous communities, the optics of weakening legal protections are troubling. The Bloc Québécois has emerged as a vocal opponent, emphasizing that Bill C-5 could allow Ottawa to override provincial jurisdiction on infrastructure and environmental matters. Quebec, which maintains its own stringent environmental laws, could find its authority bypassed if the federal government unilaterally deems a project to be in the national interest. This adds a layer of intergovernmental tension to the debate, raising questions about federalism and the balance of power between Ottawa and the provinces. While the bill's defenders argue that Canada needs to cut through red tape to build the housing, energy, and infrastructure it desperately needs, many believe there are better ways to achieve these goals. Streamlining approvals doesn't have to mean removing public oversight. Instead of gutting protective laws, the government could invest in modernizing regulatory systems, improving transparency, and ensuring coordination across jurisdictions. Critics of Bill C-5 aren't opposing development. They're opposing development without accountability. Amid this legislative battle, Canadians continue to grapple with affordability issues, from high food prices to unaffordable housing and job scarcity for young workers. Against this backdrop, Carney's government is being accused of prioritizing the needs of developers and multinational investors over ordinary citizens. Proposals like museum discount passes are being mocked as out-of-touch gestures that fail to address the real struggles of working Canadians. These symbolic policies have done little to improve public confidence in the government's economic leadership. Carney's own reputation is increasingly tied to the fate of Bill C-5. Once seen as a calm, pragmatic figure with economic expertise, his approach to this bill has prompted criticism that he's more concerned with corporate efficiency than democratic integrity. The connection to Brookfield continues to dog his public image, even if legally there's no ongoing conflict. Critics argue that whether or not direct benefits materialize, the perception of insider advantage is enough to damage public trust in government institutions. Ultimately, Bill C-5 is forcing Canadians to confront a fundamental question: should expediency outweigh process? The bill's vague language and broad powers make it a risky template for future governments who may interpret national interest in far more political terms. Once these powers are granted, there is little to stop future leaders from stretching their interpretation to push through controversial or unpopular projects, all under the justification of efficiency and progress. The absence of clear checks and balances makes this a long-term governance issue, not just a short-term policy decision. The outcome of Bill C-5 will set a precedent. If it passes in its current form, it may mark a turning point in how decisions are made in Canada, where cabinet power is elevated at the expense of Parliament, consultation is treated as a formality, and powerful players are given fast lanes to profit while the public is left in the dark. Canadians must weigh whether this is truly the kind of modernization they want, or whether the country is on the verge of normalizing executive overreach masked as reform. As the debate continues, pressure mounts on Parliament to either reject or significantly amend the bill before it reshapes the democratic foundation of the nation.